Welcome to Kaiser Caliber History. This is episode 2 of Not How You Know Them. In this series, we look at historical figures mostly known for their roles in World War II and some other historical events, and we examine their lesser-known past in World War I. This series will aim to educate viewers on the Great War and how it shaped the people who would in turn shape our modern world. This episode's subject is the infamous Nazi war criminal, Hermann Göring. Known for his role in World War II as one of Hitler's closest personal allies and the ruthless head of the German Luftwaffe, Goering was one of the biggest players on the German side of World War II. However, he wasn't always the ruthless war criminal we all know and revile today. At one time, he was one of the most recognizable men in Imperial Germany, a war hero, and one of the best fighter pilots of the Great War. By the time the armistice was signed in 1918, he appeared to have a very bright future ahead of him, even despite the German defeat. However, his hubris, craving for fame, and delusions of grandeur he developed during his time in the Great War would cause his downfall in the interwar and World War II years. You cannot truly understand the man that is Hermann Göring without examining his World War I experience. Hermann Göring was born January 12, 1893. His father was a former cavalry officer and Governor-General of German Southwest Africa. Göring was interested in the military from an early age, and it was settled upon by both his father and godfather that he would be enrolled in cadet school in 1905. After cadet school, he was sent to military training college, where he graduated at the top of his class in 1912. He was then commissioned as a second lieutenant. He was assigned to the 112th Infantry Regiment and stationed in a town on the border with France named Mulhouse. When war broke out in 1914, the French quickly marched into Mulhouse and took the town. Göring was ordered to simply scout the French position, but instead, he and his men drove the French back and out of the town. For this, he earned the Iron Cross Second Class. After his success driving back the French, he concocted a plan to capture the French general in the area. But during the mission, one of his men accidentally set off his rifle, which gave away their position. Because of this, they had to abandon the mission and retreat, leaving Göring irritated that his early chance to cement himself as a hero had failed. After these early days of the war, Göring was forced to enter a military hospital due to rheumatoid arthritis. While in the hospital, Göring became inspired to apply to the Imperial German Air Service by his friend Bruno Lerzer, who would serve as one of Göring's generals in the Luftwaffe during World War II. He originally was denied entry, but he ignored this denial and arranged his own transfer so he could be trained in aviation. For this, he was court-martialed, although he'd never face any actual consequences. He entered training as an air observer. As such, he would serve in reconnaissance missions, flying with Lerzer. He took pictures, drew maps, located enemy guns, and even learned Morse code so he could relay messages while still in the air. One of these reconnaissance missions took place over the battlefields of Verdun, where he targeted the fortifications of the French. For this mission, he earned the Iron Cross First Class in March of 1915, and between June and September of 1915, he received his pilot training, and in October of that year, he earned his pilot's badge. Göring started racking up kills right away, and he became a very competent fighter pilot. But in November of 1916, he was shot down, and as a result, severely injured his hip. After returning to action, Göring discovered that he'd become somewhat of a celebrity in Germany. He was recognized in public, and his picture appeared in magazines and on matchboxes. This would only feed his arrogant hubris. In May of 1917, after returning from the hospital again, this time for tonsillitis, he was made commander of the Jagdstaffel 27, and in August of that year, promoted to first lieutenant. In the summer of 1918, he was awarded Imperial Germany's highest military honor, the Pour le Mérite, for his aerial victories as well as his gallantry in action. And in June of that same year, he earned his 22nd aerial combat victory and was appointed commander of the famous fighter wing Freiherr von Richthofen, named for the recently killed in action Manfred von Richthofen, or as he's more commonly known, the Red Baron. This promotion cemented Göring as one of the elite fighter aces of the First World War. Although things were going great for Göring as far as his personal career as a fighter pilot, the same could not be said for Germany and its war effort. There were talks of an armistice, and in the weeks leading up to the official signing, Göring was receiving a lot of conflicting information from commanding officers. Some were telling him to have his men fly their aircraft back to Germany, others ordering him to surrender their aircraft to the French or American forces. However, once the armistice was signed, he received his final order for him and his men to fly their aircraft to an airfield in Strasbourg and surrender them to the French. A furious and defiant Göring instead ignored these orders and instructed his men to fly the planes to Darmstadt and crash land them so they couldn't fall into the hands of the enemy. During his speech he gave to his men before they departed for Darmstadt, it's said that he uttered the following quote, "Our time will come again." When examining the incident, Dr. Michael Lynch of the University of Leicester said the following, quote, "That sort of escapade reveals his sense of self-belief, self-worth, and the idea that he could ignore regulations and that the rules don't apply to him." Unquote. These would be the traits that Göring developed during the First World War and that he would carry with him the rest of his life. After the war, his fighter wing was disbanded and he was released from the army with the rank of captain. Dr. Lynch said the following on Göring coming out of the war. Quote, "He comes out of the war as a heroic figure in the eyes of many, but with the burning sense of resentment, anger, and frustration that Germany, after this great effort, this great suffering, which should have led to great heroic victory, in fact, led to a very humiliating defeat." Unquote. Thus ends our story of Hermann Göring's World War I service. Most know the story of Göring from there. After the war, his shattered ego and resentment drove him to find solace in Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. From there, he went on to become a drug addict and a war criminal who'd be complicit in one of the worst atrocities in human history. However, that story escapes the scope of this video. What doesn't, however, is how we can examine Göring's World War I years and how they turned him into the reviled figure that history would come to know him as. From the moment the action of the Great War started, he wanted to be the hero. He wanted the spotlight and he wanted the fame. And as a talented fighter pilot, he achieved that status he oh so craved. But in 1918, it all came crashing down with Germany's defeat. Gay Walters, a historian and author, said this of Göring's post-World War I mindset after he was beaten in the streets while wearing his uniform by a gang of socialists. Quote, "Göring's bitterness is just entirely magnified by the fact that his uniform and all the medals he's won are no longer marks or totems of respect." Unquote. Göring's ego, having been so damaged, and his desire to feed it, to get it back to where it was during his World War I years, is absolutely one of the largest factors that drove his madness in World War II, and consequently made him one of modern history's worst monsters. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. This has been Not How You Know Them, an examination into Hermann Göring's World War I service. This is Kaiser Caliber History. See you next time.